The advertisement in the Lordsburg, New Mexico newspaper might as well have been written in blood for all the desperation that leaked through the ink. Deacon Marshall had placed it there 3 weeks ago, and each morning he rode into town expecting nothing but returned disappointment, yet somehow still hoping. Spring of 1883 had brought more work than one man could handle on the Double M Ranch, and Deacon was drowning in it. The cattle needed tending, the fences required mending after the harsh winter, and the vegetable garden his late mother had planted years ago had become a wild tangle of weeds. He was 32 years old and felt twice that age most mornings when he rolled out of bed, his back protesting every movement. The town of Lordsburg sat dusty and small in the southwestern corner of New Mexico Territory, a stopping point for the Southern Pacific Railroad and little else. Most folks passing through had their eyes set on California or were heading back east with their tails between their legs. Nobody stayed in Lordsburg unless they had a reason, and Deacon's reason was 600 acres of stubborn land that had belonged to his family since before he was born. He hitched his horse outside the newspaper office, the same ritual he'd performed every Tuesday and Friday for weeks now. Inside, the editor, a thin man named Horace with spectacles that perpetually slid down his nose, looked up from his typewriter. "Got a response to your advertisement, Deacon," Horace said, pushing those spectacles back up. "Came in on yesterday's train." Deacon's heart kicked against his ribs. "Yeah?" Horace handed him a single envelope, the paper crisp and clean, addressed in careful handwriting that suggested education. Deacon turned it over in his calloused hands, suddenly aware of how rough they looked against the pristine white. "Aren't you going to open it?" Horace asked, curiosity bright in his eyes. "I'll read it outside," Deacon said, tipping his hat and stepping back into the New Mexico sunshine. He walked to the edge of the wooden sidewalk and leaned against a post, using his thumbnail to break the seal. The letter was brief but thorough. The writer, one Beatrice Whitmore, explained that she was 26 years old, currently residing in Santa Fe, and had grown up on a farm in Missouri before her family moved west. She had experience with livestock, could cook and clean, and most importantly, wasn't afraid of hard work. She asked about wages, living arrangements, and when she might be expected to start. There was something straightforward about the letter that Deacon appreciated. No flowery language or false promises, just facts laid out plain as day. He read it twice more before folding it carefully and tucking it into his shirt pocket. The ride back to the ranch gave him time to think. He'd advertised for help with chores, not specifying man or woman because, frankly, he didn't care as long as they could pull their weight. A woman would require separate sleeping quarters, which meant he'd need to fix up the small cabin his parents had built when they first claimed this land, before they'd constructed the main house. It was barely more than one room with a loft, but it had a good roof and a working fireplace. By the time he'd unsaddled his horse and given her fresh water, Deacon had made his decision. He went into the house and sat down at the kitchen table with paper and pen, tools he used so rarely that the ink had nearly dried out. He had to pump the pen several times before it would write properly. His letter was even briefer than hers had been. He offered $30 a month plus room and board, explained about the cabin, and said she could start as soon as she could get to Lordsburg. He'd meet any train she named, provided she sent word ahead. 3 weeks later, Deacon stood on the platform at the Lordsburg station, his good hat in his hands, watching the locomotive hiss and groan as it pulled to a stop. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might crack a rib. A handful of passengers disembarked, mostly men in business suits and one elderly couple who were immediately met by family. Then she stepped down from the passenger car, and Deacon felt the air leave his lungs. Beatrice Whitmore was not what he'd expected, though he couldn't have said exactly what he had expected. She was tall, nearly 5.5 feet, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a traveling dress the color of sage, dusty from the journey, and carried a single large carpet bag. Her face was sunburned across the nose and cheeks, suggesting recent time outdoors, and her blue eyes scanned the platform with a directness that made his stomach flip. Their eyes met across the platform, and something in her expression shifted, a slight softening around the mouth that might have been relief. She walked toward him with steady steps, no hesitation. "Mr. Marshall?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight Missouri drawl that reminded him of his mother. "Yes, madam. You must be Miss Whitmore." He realized he was crushing his hat and forced his hands to relax. "I am." She set down her bag and extended her hand for a shake, not a delicate lady's hand but a firm grip that spoke of confidence. "Thank you for meeting me." "I said I would." He picked up her bag, surprised by its weight. "This all you brought? I travel light. Everything I need is in there." She looked around the dusty street, taking in the handful of buildings that constituted downtown Lordsburg. "How far to the ranch?" "About 5 miles. I've got the wagon." He gestured toward where his flatbed wagon stood, hitched to 2 patient horses. He'd cleaned it out that morning and even put down a blanket on the bench seat, though now that seemed like a silly gesture. She climbed up onto the seat without assistance, arranging her skirts with practiced efficiency. Deacon hefted her bag into the back and climbed up beside her, very aware of the small space between them. The ride out to the ranch was quiet at first. Deacon found himself stealing glances at her from the corner of his eye, trying to reconcile the flesh and blood woman beside him with the careful handwriting of her letter. She sat straight-backed, watching the landscape roll by with apparent interest. "It's different from Missouri," she said finally. "Drier." "Gets pretty dry," he agreed. "We've got a good well, though. Water's never been a problem." "What livestock do you run?" "Mostly cattle. About 200 head right now. Had more before the winter, but we lost some to the cold snap in January. Got a dozen chickens, 3 horses, and 1 very stubborn milk cow named Bessie." The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Milk cows generally are stubborn. You worked with them before." "My family had a dairy farm before we came west. I can milk, make butter and cheese, all of it." She turned to look at him fully for the first time since they'd left town. "Your advertisement said you needed help with chores. What exactly does that entail?" He felt heat creep up his neck. "Well, pretty much everything, to be honest. I've been managing alone since my father passed 2 years ago, and I'm about drowned in work. The cattle need tending, fences need mending, there's a vegetable garden that's gone to weeds, the chickens need feeding and egg collecting, Bessie needs milking twice a day, and I haven't had a decent cooked meal in longer than I care to admit." "I see." She was quiet for a moment, and he worried he'd scared her off with the extent of the work. "What happened to your mother?" "Died when I was 23. Fever took her quick." "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." He cleared his throat. "The cabin you'll be staying in was their first home on this land. It's small, but it's sound. I cleaned it out and made sure everything works. I'm sure it will be fine." They crested a small rise and the ranch spread out before them. The main house was a sturdy 2-story structure his father had built, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The barn stood solid and red about 50 yards from the house, and beyond that, the fenced pastures stretched toward the mountains in the distance. The small cabin sat a respectful distance from the main house, tucked under a large cottonwood tree. "It's beautiful," Beatrice said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. Deacon felt an unexpected swell of pride. "It's home." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands briefly spanning her waist, and felt that same flutter in his stomach. She stepped away quickly, smoothing her skirts, and he forced himself to focus on retrieving her bag. The cabin was exactly as he'd left it that morning, swept clean with fresh linens on the bed and wood stacked beside the fireplace. Beatrice walked through slowly, running her hand along the rough-hewn table, peering into the loft, testing the pump at the small sink. "This is more than adequate," she said. "Thank you for preparing it. I'll let you get settled. Come up to the main house when you're ready and I'll show you around properly, introduce you to the animals." He set her bag on the floor and backed toward the door, suddenly awkward in the small space. "Mr. Marshall," she turned to face him, "I want you to know that I intend to earn my wages. I'm not afraid of hard work and I won't shirk my duties." "I didn't think you would, madam." "Please call me Beatrice, or B if you prefer. We'll be working closely and formality seems unnecessary." "Then you should call me Deacon." She nodded, and he left her there, walking back toward the main house with his heart doing strange acrobatics in his chest. He'd hired help, that was all. Someone to share the load of keeping the ranch running. The fact that she was a woman, and a pretty woman at that, didn't change anything. He almost believed it. An hour later, Beatrice appeared at the main house wearing a different dress, this one a practical brown cotton with the sleeves already rolled to her elbows. She'd tied a kerchief over her hair and wore sturdy boots that had clearly seen plenty of work. "Ready for the tour?" Deacon asked, stepping out onto the porch. "Ready." He showed her the barn first, introducing her to the horses. She greeted each one with a gentle confidence, running her hands down their necks and speaking in low, soothing tones. The horses, usually skittish with strangers, seemed to accept her immediately. "This is Bessie," he said, leading her to the milk cow's stall. Bessie turned her large brown eyes on them and let out a low moo of complaint. "She's past due for milking," Beatrice observed. "Why don't I take care of that now?" "You sure? I can do it later." "I'm sure." She found the milking stool and bucket without needing direction, settling beside Bessie with practiced ease. Her hands moved in a steady rhythm, and soon milk was streaming into the bucket in regular spurts. Bessie's complaints ceased. Deacon leaned against the stall door, watching. "You weren't lying about knowing your way around a dairy cow." "I never lie," she said simply. "What's the point? The truth always comes out eventually." It was such a straightforward statement, so matter-of-fact that it made him smile. "I suppose that's true." She finished milking and carried the full bucket out of the stall, moving it to the cooling shelf without being told where it went. "What else?" They spent the rest of the afternoon walking the property. He showed her the fence lines that needed repair, the vegetable garden that had become a jungle, the chicken coop where the hens clucked and fussed. Beatrice absorbed everything with the same quiet attention, asking practical questions about his routines and what needed doing most urgently. "The garden," she said as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "That should be first. If we can get it cleared and planted properly, we'll have fresh vegetables all summer and into fall. That will save money and improve meals considerably." "You like to garden." "I find it peaceful," she admitted. "There's something satisfying about putting seeds in the ground and watching them grow." They were standing at the edge of what had once been neat rows of vegetables, now overrun with weeds and volunteer plants from previous years. The evening light turned everything golden, and when Beatrice looked at him, her blue eyes held flecks of amber he hadn't noticed before. "We'll start tomorrow," he said. "Early before the heat gets too bad." "What time is early?" "Sunrise." "I'll be ready." She started toward the cabin, then paused. "Deacon, do you have supper planned?" He felt his neck heat again. "I was going to fry some bacon and beans. I could make something for both of us if you'd like. Nothing fancy, but better than bachelor fare. You don't have to do that on your first day. I want to. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her whole face. Besides, you hired me to help, didn't you? Might as well start now. They ate at the kitchen table in the main house, a simple meal of biscuits, gravy, and the last of his stored potatoes fried up with onions. It was the best food Deacon had tasted in months, and he told her so. It's basic cooking, she said, but she looked pleased. Once the garden is producing, I can do better. This is already worlds better than what I've been eating. They talked as they ate, the conversation flowing easier than he'd expected. She told him about growing up in Missouri, how her father had decided to seek opportunity in the West when she was 20, how they'd settled in Santa Fe. She didn't elaborate on what had happened to her family, and he didn't push, sensing that story would come in its own time. In turn, he told her about the ranch, how his grandfather had claimed this land and built it into something worth having, how his father had expanded the herd and improved the property, how he'd always known he'd spend his life here, working this land. You never wanted to see anywhere else? She asked. I've been to Albuquerque a few times, down to El Paso once, but this is where I belong. He looked around the kitchen, seeing it through her eyes, probably shabby and worn. I know it's not much. It's honest work and good land. That's more than a lot of people have. The simple validation of his life's work hit him harder than expected. He had to clear his throat before he could respond. Well, I'm glad you're here to help with it. So am I. That first night, Deacon lay in his bed in the main house and listened to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling around him. Somewhere out there in the small cabin, Beatrice was likely doing the same. He thought about her capable hands milking Bessie, the way she'd walked the property with such interest, the sound of her laugh when one of the chickens had pecked at her skirt hem. He'd hired help, he reminded himself again. That was all this was, but sleep was a long time coming. The next week fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. They rose with the sun and worked until sunset, breaking only for quick meals that Beatrice prepared with increasing complexity, as she learned the contents of his pantry and root cellar. The garden became her special project, and Deacon watched in amazement as she transformed the weed-choked plot into orderly rows of vegetables and herbs. "Where did you get the seeds?" he asked one morning, finding her carefully planting what looked like tomato seedlings. "I brought some with me, and I bought more in town last time we went in for supplies." She tamped soil around a seedling with gentle fingers. "You never knew what you were missing, did you?" "What do you mean?" "Fresh tomatoes, real lettuce, cucumbers for pickling. You've been living on dried beans and salted meat like you're weathering a siege." She sat back on her heels, pushing a stray lock of hair from her face and leaving a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "A man needs vegetables, Deacon," he grinned. "Yes, madam. Don't madam me. I'm only 6 years younger than you." "Yes, B." She threw a small clod of dirt at him, which he dodged easily, laughing. These moments of levity became more common as they grew comfortable with each other. Working side by side day after day, they developed an easy partnership. Beatrice proved as capable as she'd claimed, never complaining about the hard work or long hours. She could mend a fence as well as he could, handle the horses with confidence, and had a way with the cattle that surprised him. "You're good at this," he told her one afternoon as they moved part of the herd to fresh pasture. She sat her horse like she'd been born in the saddle, anticipating the cattle's movements with practiced ease. "I told you I grew up on a farm. Dairy cows are different from range cattle. Cows are cows. They're all stubborn and contrary and smarter than they look." She guided her horse to cut off a steer that was trying to break from the group. "Just like men. He laughed so hard he nearly fell out of his saddle, but it wasn't all laughter and easy partnership. There were hard days, too, days when the work seemed endless and the heat bore down like a physical weight. Days when Deacon snapped at her out of exhaustion, and she snapped right back. Days when they worked in tense silence, each nursing their frustration. Those days scared him most because they reminded him how much he'd come to depend on her presence. It had been less than 2 months since she'd stepped off that train, but already he couldn't imagine the ranch without her. Without seeing her bent over the garden in the early morning light, or hearing her singing to Bessie during milking, or finding his meals prepared and waiting, far better than anything he'd ever managed for himself. He was in trouble, and he knew it. The realization hit him fully one evening in late June. They'd been working to repair a section of fence damaged by a fallen tree, hot and exhausting work that left them both covered in sweat and dirt. When they finally finished as the sun set, Beatrice pulled off her work gloves and whooped with satisfaction. Done! Finally done! She spun in a circle, arms spread wide, face tilted to the sky. Deacon watched her, this strong, capable woman who'd come into his life and turned everything upside down in the best possible way, and felt his heart crack wide open. He was in love with her. The knowledge sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and undeniable. He was in love with Beatrice Whitmore, and he had no idea what to do about it. "Deacon, you all right?" She was looking at him with concern, her spinning stopped. "You look strange." "I'm fine," he managed. "Just tired." "Let's get cleaned up and eat. I made a stew this morning, left it simmering. Should be ready by now." They walked back toward the house together, the comfortable silence they'd developed over the past weeks settling around them. But Deacon's mind was racing. She was his employee. He paid her wages. Any romantic advance from him would be inappropriate at best, coercive at worst. She'd come here for work, not to be courted by her employer, but the heart, he was learning, didn't much care about propriety. The stew was excellent, rich with beef and vegetables from her now thriving garden. They ate on the porch, enjoying the evening breeze that brought relief from the day's heat. "I was thinking," Beatrice said, setting down her bowl, "the chicken coop could use expanding. We have enough roosting boxes for the hens we have now, but if we want to increase the flock, we'll need more space." "That's a good idea. We could sell eggs in town, bring in a little extra money." "Exactly." She smiled at him, that warm smile that made his stomach flip. "I'd also like to try making cheese with Bessie's milk. My mother used to make the most wonderful cheddar. If I can replicate it, that's another thing we could sell." "You're full of plans. Is that a problem?" There was a slight edge to her voice, a defensiveness that made him realize she'd taken his comment the wrong way. "No, not at all. I think your plans are good ones. I'm just impressed, that's all." He met her eyes directly. "You've done more for this ranch in 2 months than I managed in 2 years on my own." She relaxed, the tension leaving her shoulders. "You were overwhelmed and alone. That's not a failing." "Maybe not, but I'm grateful you're here." Something shifted in the air between them, a charge like the feeling before a lightning strike. Beatrice held his gaze for a long moment, and he wondered if she felt it too, this pull between them. "I'm grateful to be here," she said softly. "I haven't felt this settled in a long time." "What happened?" The question came out before he could stop it. "In Santa Fe, I mean. You never said why you wanted to leave." Her expression shuddered, and he immediately regretted asking. But after a moment, she sighed and looked out at the darkening landscape. "My father died a year ago. Kicked by a horse, never recovered. After that, it was just my mother and me, and she got sick last winter. Consumption. She died in March." Her voice was matter of fact, but he could hear the pain underneath. "I had no other family and not enough money to keep the small house we'd been renting." I could have found work as a laundress or maybe a school teacher, but I wanted something different, something that felt like home. I'm sorry about your parents. Thank you. She turned back to him. When I saw your advertisement, it felt right, like maybe this was where I was supposed to be. His heart hammered against his ribs. And now, do you still feel that way? Yes. The word was simple, certain. This is the first place that's felt like home since we left Missouri. He wanted to tell her then. Wanted to say that she'd become far more than hired help to him, that he thought about her constantly, that he was falling in love with her. But the words stuck in his throat, tangled up with fear and uncertainty. Instead, he said, I'm glad you're here, Bea. Real glad. She smiled at him, soft and genuine. Me too. July brought scorching heat and the height of summer work. The cattle needed constant tending as they sought shade and water in the relentless sun. The garden required daily watering to keep the plants alive. Deacon and Beatrice fell into a pattern of working the coolest parts of the day, taking a break during the worst heat of the afternoon, then resuming work in the evening. Those afternoon breaks became Deacon's favorite part of the day. They'd retreat to the relative cool of the main house porch, drinking cold water from the well and talking about everything and nothing. He learned that she loved to read, but hadn't owned a book since selling most of her possessions after her mother's death. He rode into town the next week and returned with 3 novels from the general store, used but in good condition. The look on her face when he handed them to her was worth every penny. You didn't have to do this, she said, running her fingers over the covers with reverence. I wanted to. She threw her arms around him in an impulsive hug, and for one perfect moment he held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his. Then she pulled back, blushing. Thank you, Deacon, really. You're welcome. After that, he'd sometimes find her reading in the evenings after work was done, sitting on her cabin porch with a lamp burning beside her, completely absorbed in whatever story held her attention. He loved watching her like this, seeing her at peace. He was hopelessly in love with her, and every day it got harder to hide it. The break came in August, sudden and unexpected like a summer storm. They'd been working to move part of the herd to new pasture when Deacon's horse stepped in a hole and went down hard. Deacon managed to kick free of the stirrups and roll away, but he felt something wrench in his left ankle as he hit the ground. Pain shot up his leg, sharp and immediate. Deacon. Beatrice was off her horse in seconds, running to his side. Are you hurt? My ankle, he gritted out, trying to push himself to sitting. Don't move yet. Her hands were gentle but firm as she examined his leg, carefully removing his boot. He hissed in pain as she manipulated his ankle. I don't think it's broken, but it's definitely sprained. You need to stay off it. I can't stay off it. There's work to be done. The work will get done. Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. You, however, are going to rest and let this heal properly. Otherwise, you'll make it worse and be useless for even longer. She was right, and he knew it. But the idea of being laid up while she handled everything alone made him want to punch something. With her help, he managed to mount her horse, keeping his weight off the injured ankle. She led both horses back to the ranch, glancing back at him frequently with worry clear on her face. I'm fine, he said. You're not fine. You're hurt. It's just a sprain. Just a sprain can turn into a permanent injury if you don't treat it right. She helped him down at the house and supported his weight as they made their way inside. Sit. He sat. She brought cold water from the well and wrapped his ankle in wet cloths, propping his leg up on a second chair. Then she stood back and surveyed him with her hands on her hips. You're going to stay off this for at least 3 days. No arguing. 3 days. B, that's not practical. What's not practical is you re-injuring yourself and being down for 3 weeks instead of 3 days. She softened slightly. I can handle the ranch work for a few days, Deacon. Let me. He wanted to argue more, but the throbbing in his ankle was making him nauseous. All right, 3 days. Good. Those 3 days were torture for Deacon, not because of the pain in his ankle, though that was bad enough, but because he had to watch Beatrice doing everything herself. She rose before dawn and worked past sunset, handling all the chores that the two of them usually split between them. He could see the exhaustion in her face, the way she moved stiffly after a full day of hard labor. On the evening of the second day, she came in to check on him and nearly fell asleep sitting at the kitchen table. "B," he said gently, "you need to rest." "I'm fine." She stifled a yawn. "How's your ankle?" "Better. The swelling's gone down." "Good." She forced herself to stand. "I should go make supper." "No." He stood too, testing his ankle. It hurt, but it was bearable. "You've done enough. More than enough. Let me cook tonight. You're supposed to be resting, and you're about to collapse. Sit down, B, please." She sat, and he could see the relief in her eyes as she took the weight off her feet. He moved around the kitchen, favoring his good leg, and put together a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken left from the previous night. Not fancy, but edible. They ate in silence for a while before Beatrice spoke. "I don't know how you did this alone for so long. I didn't do it as well as you've been doing it. I'm exhausted, and it's only been 2 days, which is why I hired you." He reached across the table and took her hand without thinking, needing the contact. "You're not alone anymore, B. Tomorrow I'm going back to work, ankle or no ankle. Deacon, you need to heal properly." "It's much better already. I'll wrap it and be careful." He squeezed her hand. "But I'm not letting you kill yourself doing everything alone. We're partners in this, remember?" She looked down at their joined hands, and something in her expression shifted. When she looked back up at him, her eyes were bright with emotion. "Partners," she repeated softly. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning beyond the simple definition. He should let go of her hand, should step back from this precipice he found himself on. Instead, he stood, pulling her up with him, never breaking contact. "B," he said, his voice rough. "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I know you came here for work. I know that's what I offered and what you accepted, but somewhere along the way things changed for me." He took a breath, committed now. "You're not just my employee. You're my partner, yes, but you're more than that too. I think about you constantly. I watch for you in the mornings, listen for your voice. I've never felt this way about anyone, and I need you to know. Even if you don't feel the same, even if this makes things awkward, I had to tell you." She stared at him, her blue eyes wide and searching. "You're saying you have feelings for me. I'm saying I'm in love with you." The silence that followed felt eternal. Deacon's heart pounded so hard he thought it might break free from his chest. He'd done it now, laid everything bare. If she rejected him, he didn't know how they'd move forward. Then Beatrice stepped closer, closing the small distance between them. She reached up and cupped his face with her work-roughened hands. "You stubborn, wonderful man," she whispered. "I've been in love with you since the day you brought me those books." Relief and joy flooded through him in equal measure. "Really, really." She smiled, that beautiful smile that transformed her whole face. "I thought you just saw me as hired help. I thought I was going crazy, having feelings for my employer. No." He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer. "Never just hired help. You're everything, B." She kissed him then, rising up on her toes to press her lips to his. It was soft and sweet and perfect, like coming home after a long journey. He kissed her back, pouring all his pent-up longing into it, trying to show her with actions what words couldn't fully express. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Beatrice laughed. "Well," she said, "that certainly changes things. Good changes, the best changes." She sobered slightly. "What happens now?" Now we keep doing what we've been doing, but without hiding how we feel. We're partners, B, in the ranch, in life, in everything. If you'll have me, if I'll have you. Deacon, I came here looking for work and found a home, found you. Of course I'll have you. He kissed her again because he could, because she was his and he was hers, because joy was bubbling up inside him and had to find release somehow. She kissed him back just as enthusiastically, her fingers threading through his hair. They spent the rest of the evening on the porch, sitting close together on the swing his father had built years ago, talking about the future. Their future together. We should get married, Deacon said as the stars came out overhead. That is, if you want to. I know we haven't been courting long, but I'm certain, I've never been more certain of anything. We've been courting for months, Beatrice said, leaning her head on his shoulder. We just didn't call it that, and yes, I want to marry you, whenever you want. Tomorrow, she laughed. Maybe give it a little more time than that. A few weeks at least. I'd like a proper dress, even if it's just a simple one. You could wear a flour sack and still be the most beautiful bride in New Mexico. Flatterer. Just honest. They sat together until the moon rose high, making plans and dreaming aloud about the future. They'd expand the ranch, maybe buy more land. Increase the herd, sell eggs and cheese in town. Build a life together on this land that had claimed Deacon's heart long ago and had now claimed Beatrice's too. I want children, Beatrice said quietly. Someday. Is that something you want? Yes. He'd never thought much about it before, but now, imagining a child with Beatrice's blue eyes and his dark hair, the idea filled him with longing. I want that too. Good. The next weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen moments of affection. They kept their relationship quiet for now, wanting to enjoy this new phase together before sharing it with the world. But Deacon caught himself smiling at odd moments, feeling lighter than he had in years. Beatrice bloomed under the freedom of acknowledged love. She sang while she worked, touched his hand in passing, kissed him good night at her cabin door with a sweetness that left him breathless. In early September, they rode into Lordsburg together to buy supplies and make arrangements for their wedding. They planned a simple ceremony at the small church, with Horace, the newspaper editor, and his wife as witnesses. Nothing fancy, just the legal binding of their lives together. The dress Beatrice chose was pale blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but lovely. Deacon bought a new shirt and had his one good suit cleaned and pressed. They set the date for the last Saturday in September. As the day approached, Deacon found himself alternating between excitement and nervousness. Not nervousness about marrying Beatrice, that was the surest thing in his life, but nervousness about whether he could give her the life she deserved, whether the ranch would provide well enough, whether he'd be a good husband. You're thinking too loud, Beatrice said one evening as they sat together after supper. Am I? I can practically hear your thoughts spinning. She took his hand. What's worrying you? What if I'm not enough? What if the ranch fails or I can't provide properly? Or she stopped him with a kiss. Deacon Marshall, you are more than enough. We're partners, remember. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. That's what marriage means. I just want you to be happy. I am happy, happier than I've ever been. She cupped his face gently. Stop borrowing trouble from tomorrow. We have everything we need right here. She was right, as she so often was. He pulled her close and held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. I love you, he said. I love you too. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the September sky a brilliant blue. Deacon woke early in the main house, too excited to sleep. He'd spent the previous night alone, as Beatrice had insisted on observing at least some traditional proprieties. She'd stayed with Horace's wife in town. He dressed carefully in his suit, fumbling with the tie until he got it right. His reflection in the mirror showed a man he barely recognized, happy, excited, nervous, all at once. The ride into town felt both endless and too short. When he arrived at the church, Horace was already there, beaming. "Big day, Deacon." "Yes, sir. She's a fine woman. You're a lucky man." "I know it." The church was small and plain, but someone had placed wildflowers on the altar. Probably Horace's wife, Mary. The simple beauty of it made Deacon's throat tight. Then Beatrice appeared in the doorway, and everything else faded away. She was radiant in her blue dress, her hair done up in a style he'd never seen before, with small flowers tucked into the arrangement. She carried a bouquet of more wildflowers, and when she smiled at him, Deacon felt his heart might burst from his chest. She walked down the short aisle alone, head high and confident, and took his hand when she reached him. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi yourself. You're beautiful. You look very handsome." The preacher, an elderly man named Reverend Thompson, cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony was simple and brief. They spoke the traditional vows, promising to love and honor each other in all circumstances. When Deacon slipped the simple gold band he'd bought onto Beatrice's finger, his hand shook slightly. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Thompson said with a warm smile. "You may kiss your bride." Deacon cupped Beatrice's face gently and kissed her, pouring all his love and promise into it. She kissed him back, and he heard Mary sigh happily from where she stood witnessing. They were married. The ride back to the ranch as husband and wife felt different somehow, more real, more permanent. Beatrice sat close beside him on the wagon seat, her hand in his, occasionally leaning her head on his shoulder. "Mrs. Marshall," he said, trying out the name. "I like the sound of that," she replied. "Me too." They'd prepared a special supper the day before, cold fried chicken and fresh bread and vegetables from the garden, with a cake Mary had insisted on making as a wedding gift. They ate on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "This is perfect," Beatrice said softly. "Yes, it is." That night, Beatrice moved into the main house, into Deacon's room that was now their room. They came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other in this new way, becoming truly one as the vows had promised. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Beatrice traced patterns on Deacon's chest. "I never thought I'd be this happy," she murmured. "After my parents died, I thought maybe I'd used up my allotment of happiness." "We're just getting started," Deacon said, kissing the top of her head. "We'll build a whole life of happiness together. Promise, promise." The fall passed in a golden haze of work and love. They harvested the garden together, Beatrice teaching Deacon how to can and preserve the vegetables for winter. The cheese-making experiments proved successful, and they began selling both cheese and eggs in town, bringing in welcome extra income. As winter approached, they prepared the ranch together, securing the barn against the cold, laying in supplies, making sure the cattle had access to shelter. Working side by side came as naturally as breathing now, each anticipating the other's needs and movements. In December, as the first snow fell, Beatrice told Deacon she was pregnant. He whooped and picked her up, spinning her around before carefully setting her back down. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. The baby should come in early summer." "A baby." Wonder filled his voice. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. He pulled her close, one hand settling protectively over her still flat stomach. "Thank you, B, for everything. For coming here, for staying, for loving me, for this. Thank you for placing that advertisement," she said, smiling up at him. "Best decision I ever made, answering it. Best decision I ever made, placing it." The winter was mild, and Beatrice bloomed with pregnancy. Deacon watched in awe as her body changed, nurturing the life they'd created together. He became even more protective, insisting she not overwork herself, though she laughed and told him she was pregnant, not made of glass. They spent the long winter evenings planning, talking about names and nurseries and what kind of parents they wanted to be. Deacon converted a small room upstairs into a nursery, painting it a soft yellow and building a cradle from cottonwood with his own hands. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle calved successfully, the garden got planted, and Beatrice's belly grew round and full. Deacon loved watching her work in the garden, one hand absently rubbing her stomach as she tended the plants. In late June, on a hot afternoon when the cicadas sang loud in the cottonwood trees, Beatrice went into labor. Deacon had prepared for this, had arranged for Mary to come stay when the time came, had read everything he could find about childbirth. But when Beatrice gasped and grabbed the table, her water breaking in a rush, his mind went blank with panic. "Get Mary," Beatrice said, her voice strained but steady. "Now, Deacon." He rode to town faster than he'd ever ridden before, returning with Mary in record time. Mary shooed him out of the bedroom, telling him to boil water and stay out of the way. The hours that followed were the longest of Deacon's life. He paced the kitchen, listening to the sounds from upstairs, alternating between prayer and panic. Every cry from Beatrice felt like a knife in his chest. Finally, as the sun set in a blaze of color, he heard a new sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Mary appeared at the top of the stairs, beaming. "You can come up now, Papa." Deacon took the stairs 2 at a time. Beatrice lay in their bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a small bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up as he entered, her eyes shining. "Come meet your son," she said. "A son." Deacon approached on shaking legs and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, one small fist waving in the air. "He's perfect," Deacon whispered, afraid to speak louder and break the spell. "You're perfect. Thank you, Bea. Would you like to hold him?" He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and Beatrice transferred the warm weight of their son into his arms. The baby was so small, so impossibly fragile seeming, but when Deacon's finger touched his tiny palm, the baby's hand closed around it with surprising strength. "He's strong," Deacon said, wonder filling his voice. "He is," Beatrice agreed. "What should we name him?" They discussed names for months but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son's face, Deacon knew. "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Marshall, after your father." Tears filled Beatrice's eyes. "You do that. Your father gave me you. It seems right to honor his memory." "Daniel Marshall," she repeated softly, reaching out to stroke the baby's cheek. "Welcome to the world, little one." Mary left them alone after making sure Beatrice was comfortable and the baby was nursing properly. Deacon stayed by Beatrice's side, unable to look away from either of them. "We made this," he said in awe. "We made a whole person. We did." Beatrice smiled tiredly. "He's going to have a good life, Deacon. On this ranch with us. He'll grow up loved and safe. We'll make sure of it." The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Daniel proved to be a healthy baby with a good appetite and powerful lungs. Deacon learned to change diapers and soothe crying and function on minimal sleep. He'd never been happier in his life. Beatrice recovered quickly from childbirth, and soon was back to working the ranch, though they'd hired a young man named Tom from town to help with some of the heavier work. Beatrice often worked with Daniel strapped to her back in a sling, the baby content to observe the world from his perch. As Daniel grew, he became the center of their world. His first smile, first laugh, first tooth, each milestone was celebrated and marveled over. Deacon couldn't believe how much love he had for this tiny person, how his heart expanded to make room. The ranch prospered too. With Tom's help and Beatrice's excellent management, they expanded the herd and increased their egg and cheese production. They were making enough money to not just survive, but to save, to plan for the future. When Daniel was 2 years old, toddling around the ranch and getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of a child who knew he was loved, Beatrice told Deacon she was pregnant again. "Another one," Deacon said, pulling her into his arms. "We're going to have another baby. Are you happy?" "I'm always happy when it comes to you and our family. Always." This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Beatrice knew what to expect. Their daughter was born on a cold January morning, entering the world with a cry that suggested she'd be just as strong-willed as her mother. "Sarah," Beatrice said, looking down at the baby girl in her arms. "After your mother." Deacon felt his throat tighten. His mother had been gone for over 15 years now, but the gesture of remembrance touched him deeply. "Thank you." Daniel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Deacon watched his son carefully hold Sarah's tiny hand, speaking to her in the garbled language of a 2-year-old, and felt his heart might burst from happiness. "We're a family," he said to Beatrice that night as they lay in bed, Sarah sleeping in her cradle beside them, Daniel tucked into his small bed in the nursery next door. "We've been a family for a while now," Beatrice said, snuggling closer to him. "But yes, it feels complete now, doesn't it?" "It does." He kissed her forehead. "I love you, Bea. I thank God every day that you answered that advertisement. I thank God every day that you placed it." The years rolled on, bringing changes and challenges, but always underlaid with love. Daniel grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and the animals, following Deacon everywhere and asking endless questions. Sarah proved to be quieter but just as determined, with her mother's practical nature and her father's steady temperament. When Daniel was 5 and Sarah was 3, Beatrice gave Deacon the news that they'd have one more addition to their family. This time, twin boys arrived in a dramatic birth that lasted most of a day and left Deacon gray-faced with worry. But Beatrice came through it strong, and the boys James and Joseph were healthy if small. 4 children, Deacon said, looking at his suddenly much larger family. "We have 4 children, Bea. We certainly do." She was tired but radiant, a baby in each arm while Daniel and Sarah peeked at their new brothers with wide eyes. "Think you can handle it, with you by my side? I can handle anything." It was the truth. Over the years, Beatrice had proven to be his partner in every sense of the word. She managed the household and the ranch finances with equal skill, raised their children with firm kindness, and still found time to tend her beloved garden and make cheese that was now sought after throughout the territory. The Double M Ranch had become one of the most prosperous small ranches in the area, known for quality cattle and excellent dairy products. They bought another 200 acres, expanded the herd to over 400 head, and built a proper dairy barn for Bessie's numerous descendants. Tom had married and built a small house on the edge of the property, becoming a permanent part of the ranch operation. His wife helped Beatrice with the cheese-making and the children, and their own kids played with the Marshall children in a noisy, happy gaggle. As Deacon approached 40, he sometimes stood on the porch of the main house and marveled at the life he'd built. The ranch that had once been a lonely, overwhelming burden was now a thriving enterprise filled with life and laughter. The house rang with children's voices, smelled of Beatrice's cooking, and felt like what it was, a home filled with love. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Deacon and Beatrice sat on the porch swing, watching their children play in the yard. Daniel, now 10, was teaching 7-year-old Sarah to rope a practice post while the 5-year-old twins tumbled in the grass with more enthusiasm than grace. "You ever regret it?" Deacon asked, taking Beatrice's hand. "Answering that advertisement, leaving Santa Fe for this?" Beatrice looked at him, her blue eyes still as bright as the day he'd first seen her step off the train. She had lines at the corners of her eyes now, and her hands were work-roughened, but to Deacon, she'd never been more beautiful. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. You, the children, the ranch, this is my life, Deacon. The life I was meant to have. Mine, too." He squeezed her hand. "I was drowning before you came. I didn't even realize it, but I was. You saved me, Bea. We saved each other." She leaned her head on his shoulder, a familiar and beloved gesture. "I was lost after my parents died. I didn't know where I belonged or what I was supposed to do. Then I came here and found my purpose, found my home, found you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun complete its descent and the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. Sarah called out in triumph as her rope finally caught the practice post, and Daniel cheered for her. The twins stopped their wrestling to applaud their sister, then immediately went back to roughhousing. "They're good kids," Deacon observed. "They are. They're growing up with everything they need: love, stability, purpose. They'll know how to work hard and care for the land. They'll know they're loved. Because of you, because of us." Beatrice tilted her face up to him. "Everything we've built, we built together. That's what partners do." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that spoke of years of shared joy and struggle, of partnership and love. When they pulled apart, both children and stars seemed brighter. "I love you, Beatrice Marshall," Deacon said. "More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today." "That's very poetic for a rancher," she teased. "You bring out the poetry in me." She laughed, that wonderful laugh he'd loved from the beginning. "I love you too, Deacon. Always have, always will." As the years continued to pass, the Marshall family grew and thrived. Daniel proved to have a natural talent for working with horses and began training them, bringing in additional income. Sarah developed her mother's gift for gardening and dairy work, taking over much of the cheese production by the time she was 14. The twins were inseparable, working together on every task and causing twice the trouble and twice the joy. Deacon watched his children grow with pride and occasional melancholy at how quickly time passed. But Beatrice was always there beside him, steady and strong, her hand in his through every challenge and triumph. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, survived hard winters and dry summers, dealt with sick livestock and broken equipment, and through it all, their love remained the foundation on which everything else was built. When Deacon turned 50, Beatrice organized a surprise party that brought together everyone from the ranch and half of Lordsburg. As he looked around at the gathering, his tall, strong sons, his capable daughters, the friends and neighbors who'd become like family, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Beatrice asked, slipping her hand into his. "That I'm the luckiest man alive." He turned to her, this woman who'd answered a desperate advertisement and changed his entire life. "That I was a fool to think I could run this ranch alone. That the best decision I ever made was hiring help. The best decision you ever made was hiring me specifically," she corrected with a smile. "True." He pulled her close, not caring that they had an audience. "The best decision I ever made was you, Bea. Everything good in my life comes from that choice. Everything good in my life comes from answering your advertisement," she replied, reaching up to cup his face. "We were meant to find each other, Deacon, meant to build this life together. Partners in everything," he said. "Partners in everything," she agreed. As the party continued around them, they shared a kiss, and Deacon marveled once again at the twist of fate that had brought them together. He'd needed someone to help with chores, had placed a simple advertisement born of desperation. What he'd gotten was so much more. A partner, a wife, a lover, a friend, the mother of his children and the heart of his home. A woman who'd taken a struggling ranch and turned it into a prosperous enterprise through hard work and clever management. Someone who'd transformed his lonely existence into a life filled with love and laughter. The woman who came to help became his partner in everything, just as the story would always tell. But the truth was even simpler and more profound than that. She'd become his everything, period. And as they stood together on the porch of the ranch house years later, aged but still strong, watching their grandchildren play in the same yard where their own children had played, Deacon squeezed Beatrice's hand. "No regrets?" he asked, a question that had become a tradition between them. "Not a single one," she replied, as she always did. "You?" "None. I'd do it all again exactly the same way as long as it led me to you." The sun set over the Double M Ranch, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Beatrice leaned her head on Deacon's shoulder, right where it belonged. They'd built a life together from nothing but hard work and love, and it had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything. Their love story had started with a simple advertisement and a desperate need for help. It had grown into a partnership that transformed a struggling ranch into a thriving enterprise. But most importantly, it had become a love that stood the test of time, that weathered every storm, that grew stronger with each passing year. Daniel had taken over the majority of the ranch operations now, with his siblings working alongside him. The Marshall children had all stayed close to home, building their own houses on the property, raising their own families. The ranch had become a true family enterprise, exactly as Deacon and Beatrice had always dreamed. On quiet evenings, Deacon and Beatrice would sit on their porch, that same porch where they'd shared so many important moments, and watch the ranch bustle with activity. Children and grandchildren coming and going, cattle in the pastures, horses in the corrals, the garden flourishing under Sarah's care. "We did well," Beatrice would say. "We did," Deacon would agree. And in those moments, with her hand in his and their family thriving around them, Deacon knew that placing that advertisement all those years ago hadn't just saved his ranch. It had saved him, had given him a life worth living, a love worth having, a legacy worth leaving. Beatrice had come to help with chores, but she'd stayed for love. And together, they'd built something that would endure long after they were gone, a family, a home, a testament to what two people could accomplish when they worked side by side, hand in hand, heart to heart. As the stars emerged in the vast New Mexico sky, Deacon pulled Beatrice closer and kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her. "I love you, Bea," he said, as he'd said thousands of times before and would say thousands of times more. "I love you too, Deacon," she replied, her voice warm with all the years of their shared life. "Always have, always will." And that was the truth of it, the simple and beautiful truth. A rancher had needed help. A woman had answered. And together they'd found not just partnership, but the kind of love that poets write about and dreamers dream of. The kind of love that lasts forever.